Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heart lines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker. Are your relationships all that you want them to be? Do rough patches ever catch you by surprise, causing you to think, why is it so hard right now? Why is there tension? Was it something I did? Despite our best intentions, we all have blind spots, bad relational habits that are keeping us from enjoying our relationships fully. And since relationships stand at the center of all we do, if we can learn to do relationships even fractionally better, every aspect of our lives improves. Whether you struggle to overcome past wounds, insecurity, blame, or envy, it's time to reflect on your relational habits and reset. An experienced counselor, Dr. Laurel Shaler, is passionate about helping women thrive in all of their relationships. Her book, Relational Reset, will reveal unhealthy patterns that may be holding you back, giving you practical steps for improving your relationships and help you find your ultimate security and identity in Messiah. When you reset your relationships, you honor God, yourself, and the ones you love. Dr. Laurel Shaler is a national certified counselor and licensed social worker. She's an associate professor at Liberty University, where she serves as the director of the Master of Arts in Professional Counseling program. Dr. Shaler writes and speaks on the intersection of faith, culture, and emotional well-being. She and her husband, an officer in the Navy Reserves, have one daughter and live in South Carolina. You can learn more and contact her at www.drlaurelshaler.com. Here to discuss her new book, Relational Reset, Unlearning the Habits That Hold You Back and Reclaiming Sanity, Hope and Healing for Trauma, Stress, and Overcoming Life Events, is Dr. Laurel Shaler. Dr. Shaler, welcome to Revealing the Truth.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Well, it's great to have you on the program. So you are deeply involved in helping people find what's going on in their relationships, whether or not it's marital, friendships, parental, sibling, the whole gamut of relationships, because that's what faith is all about, is a relationship with God. And it plays out in the natural, and oftentimes our natural relationships are a reflection of our supernatural relationship, feeling unworthy, insecure, wondering what we've done to offend God, why are we not hearing? All that plays into, I haven't gotten a text message lately, I'm not getting a response, I don't get an email, I don't get that phone call. All those things run to that question that we have with people in our lives, but then plays into the part of, is God actually there? Is He hearing my prayers? Have I done something to offend Him? All that plays out in the natural and the supernatural. So it's really quite important that we become masters of relationship.
Yes, absolutely. And you hit the nail on the head. I always think of the scripture where Jesus was asked what was the most important law, and He said to love the Lord your God. That was the first and most important commandment. But the second one was like it, which is to love your neighbor as yourself. So that's it. It's loving God and loving other people. And those are the relationships that we're talking about here.
So where did you get your relationship lessons? What was there's two schools. There's the school of, I had horrible parents, I had horrible relationships, and I'm going to devote my life to finding out my own answer. And in doing so, I'm going to make a career out of it. And once I find my own answer, I'm going to share it with the world. Then there's the other school that says I had great examples, I had great life lessons, I had great models in my life, and it made me feel like I've heard so many tragic stories that I have this gift of compassion. I want to share that with the world and go out and repair what we would call in Hebrew tikkun olam, repair the world, restore the world back to this balance that there exists between people. So let's go back to little Laurel, growing up in her home, faith influences in your life, what your journey was like, the examples you had, and when you claimed the faith as your own.
Right. Well, and I would say that based on those two schools, I probably had a little bit of both. I did grow up in a very loving home with wonderful parents that I just live a mile from now. So I just love them and am thankful for them. And I did grow up in church. basically by means of mostly being taken to church, and when I was in high school, taking myself or riding with friends, because I just loved going to church. I always did. I remember being a little girl and having a little green Bible, and even if I would miss church, I would take my little green Bible and I would stand up on my parents' dining room table and I would hold up my Bible and I would say some of the things that I had heard at church, that had been taught at church through the Word of God. And I always loved being there. And for my ninth birthday, I asked if I could be baptized. And I later learned that baptism wasn't a birthday gift. It was a symbol of a free gift that I had been given as a result of faith in Jesus. He bestowed his grace upon me, and Jesus redeemed me, and he saved me from my sin by dying on the cross and coming back to life. And I'm so thankful for the salvation I have in him. So I was saved when I was about 8 years old and took that step of baptism as an outward expression of the inner change that I had experienced. And through that journey, I moved on into middle school and high school, and I'm grateful to have stayed in church and to have stayed a part of my youth group and to have learned really important life lessons from the Bible. And that was only a part of the story. That was the beginning. That was the salvation. But I also look at it a moment in my life when I would say I kind of had what some might call a recovery testimony. And what happened for me then is when I was 18, I had life-saving surgery. And I'll never forget the doctor looking me in the eyes and saying, if you do not have this surgery, you will die. And so at 18, to go through something so life-changing, life-altering, I knew that the Lord had given me a second chance at life. But there was also a struggle, especially for those first few years, of worry. Would I have another health crisis? Would this new health crisis be the end of me? Would I not survive a second time? Would I not be given that second miracle? And just really struggling with focusing on the Lord versus focusing on the world and the fears and the anxiety. And despite knowing some scripture and meditating on the words of Jesus in Matthew 6, where he tells us so clearly that worrying doesn't even add a single hour to our life, so it's completely a waste of time, I still struggled with some of those things. And from there, I moved into just a calling to help other people, and went into social work, and then moved on and got a PhD in counselor education so that I could really dive in to understanding people and wanting to help them from a Christ-centered perspective. And through that journey I was in relationship with a wide variety of people. And I think that was a big catalyst for wanting to share some of this information through Relational Reset, is having some really great experiences with friendships and with family members and with colleagues and church members and neighbors, but also having some relationships that struggled, and what I've learned as a result of a combination of personal experience, but also the experience through the education and working with clients who also struggled with relationships.
It's interesting that you talk about relationship in general. I don't think we spend enough time studying the art and the science of relationship management and relationship understanding, relationship dynamics. It seems like we feel like we're equipped for relationship, we're built for relationship, and we want relationships to go our way. So it's that self-centeredness as opposed to that relationship-centric approach that winds up getting us into a lot of difficulty. And then we wonder why. Why are we attracting who we're attracting? Why are we engaged in what we're engaged in? And there are things that you have studied and you've identified in the book that not only do we need to understand some of the fundamental principles, the basics of relationship, but we also need to look for indicators that we might be in need of a relational reset. And so that's really the foundation of the book, is to break out various factors that contribute to the need for relational reset. We all come with, it's interesting that the airlines don't let you take your baggage on board. But yet we bring our baggage into every relationship, but it's just not feasible. It gets too crowded. Your baggage, my baggage, 500 other people's baggage. Pretty soon we're all crammed in there. That's the reason why they have a belly of an airplane where they put the baggage and you can't bring it on. And that's really kind of a metaphor for relationships, is that if you have that much baggage, you need to kind of lighten your load, and just whatever you can carry on should really be all you carry with you. So in looking at the book itself and the concepts, how do they play out in your life? Because it's been my experience doing over 1,300 of these interviews and many years in broadcast, that you usually wind up writing, and for myself, every sermon and every book I've ever written has always been to me first. What did you find? How did you find this cathartic ministering to yourself first? Did you first look at your relationships and use them, or did you do some surveys, or did you do the collective myself plus all others, and how do I relate to my patients? Because we tend in counseling to have certain aha moments, but we can't reveal that, wow, I see a lot of myself in that situation. I really need to have some work to do, so I need to pay attention to what I'm about to say to this person. What are the indicators that a person's in need of a relational reset?
Yeah, well, first, I love your metaphor about the baggage, and leave the big baggage behind and only bring in what you can carry on, because we all have some type of baggage if we've lived long enough. So we're not necessarily going to be able to drop all of it, but we shouldn't be, trying to bring on 50-pound suitcases and tuck them under our seat. So that was a great metaphor. And you're right. I think it's really helpful when we write and speak from a place of me too. I've been there. I've struggled with this. You're not alone in this experience. So what I did is use some of my own personal life experiences, really focusing on the lessons that I had to learn and what I went through, and then also looked at some of the patterns that I was hearing from clients and even from friends. What were they experiencing? One of the most important kind of revelations for me was the issue of insecurity, and I share this story about how I saw a friend one day and she had a book about insecurity on her coffee table, and I asked her about it, and she says, "Oh, it was so great. It really helped me to focus on some of my areas of insecurity." And I felt defensive, and I was like, "Oh, I don't need that book. I was just thinking maybe some of my clients would need it." But when I started to get really honest with myself, I realized that we all have insecurities, and that's something that could stand to come to light in most of our lives. So it was a good thing to have that piece of the Johari window open for me, and to be able to say, this is something that I struggle with as well. And so, yes, I'm writing it for others, but I've also been there. And I think for any of us, if we're tired of struggling because of relationship difficulties, maybe we are constantly offended, constantly afraid of rejection, maybe we have a difficult time communicating, or we just always feel misunderstood, defensive, that those all may be indicators that we need a relational reset. And really, I think we can all use help with a relationship or two.
You talk about insecurity. I wonder if we really understand what insecurity is and how it impacts our view of ourself, our view of our image as it relates to both man and God. And is it not the underpinning of faith is to trust in the fact that when I talk to you, I'm talking to a child of God. You were created in the exact same image of God that I am. The Spirit in you is no stronger, no better, no weaker than the Spirit that's in me. And the same Creator made us both. Therefore, we were built on a par with each other. And that is the foundational starting point of our relationship, is that you and I were born to be in relationship with a common point of origin, with a common Father, created in a common image, but yet endowed with certain different gifts which make us unique, but do not make us better. Your gifts are not better than my gifts. I'm equipped the way God equipped me. God equipped you the way God equipped you. And my job as a human being is to endeavor to see you through the lens of the Lord, not through my own filters. And when you grab a hold of that fundamental truth that you're never alone, you're never above, you're never below, you weren't made to be you were called to be the head, not the tail, but you were called to be the head, not the tail. So two heads are better than one. That's a wonderful thing. And the things that make us different should be what makes us stronger when we partner together in relationship. But many people say, well, they look on the external. And of course, God's word says, is that man looks on the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart. So our insecurities artificially inseminated into our life by not the author of our life, but the father of lies.
Yes, yes, who seeks to destroy. So Satan would have no greater joy than that we would be separated from God and separated from his people in creating this turmoil in our lives. And that really is where this insecurity comes from. We start to doubt not only who we are, but whose we are. And we forget that, once God has called us a child of God, that is who we are. And that's what he proclaims us to be. And you're right. We are all made in his image. And if we could learn to look at one another in that way, we would be less likely to struggle with all of these challenges that really get in the way of us interacting the way that God would have us to interact with one another.
Is a struggle with insecurity and a struggle with unworthiness, are they the same or are they different?
I think that's a good question. I think in some cases they can be the same, that's where the insecurity comes from, is you just don't feel worthy. You don't feel like you're good enough, smart enough, pretty enough, athletic enough. You have all these areas that you just don't feel like you're enough. And so you're not worthy of whatever it is. Maybe you're not worthy of that job or of that friendship or of that relationship or of that position at church. So there is some hand-holding between feeling unworthy and insecurity. I think sometimes insecurity comes from real life past experiences. You mentioned earlier, you said these schools of thoughts, and it made me think of a dear friend of mine who had that experience of having a really bad upbringing and a lot of abuse. And she is one of the kindest and most compassionate and grace-filled and loving people I know, because she had and has such a strong relationship with the Lord, and that's what she was going to channel. She was going to show other people the love of the Lord, which owned by her own parents growing up. So sometimes insecurity comes from those really rough spots in our lives, even traumatic past experiences. But again, we have to be able to turn that over to God and to say, I know that that's not what I deserved. That's not who you created me to be. That's not who you created my parents to be or other caregivers to be. And that there was sin, that that sin is the only word that we can use for these horrific abuses and traumas. So now what do I do with that, Lord? What do I do with the fact that I was so mistreated in the past, and as a result, I feel insecure going forward in relationships because I'm afraid or worried that these same things could happen with someone else. These same patterns could develop. Or maybe sometimes I am concerned that I may turn into that same person, that I may inadvertently duplicate what was taught to me as a child. So we have to be able to release those insecurities and become secure first in God. And then we can have that freedom in our relationships where we're not constantly afraid that the other person's going to leave us or that they're going to mistreat us, but we can really feel safe in those relationships.
It's interesting, you started your book with silencing insecurity. Did you do that because that is the foundation that many of these other issues are built upon, or that was the one that you felt was the most common, or just was it a random placement that you started there?
No, it was definitely the first two choices that you gave. I do believe that it's the primary issue that people struggle with, in particular women, and also I think that there is some foundational aspects of insecurity that play into these other issues. They play into expectations and disappointment and past fears and judging others and being jealous of other people. It's like insecurity is that foundation for so many of the other problematic patterns.
Is this more prevalent in women than it is in men, or is it more, are women more transparent? I know that there's a tremendous amount of very insecure men that would deny their insecurity and looking for relationships or relationship situations that are unhealthy or remain or attract unhealthy relationships, but it's only based on insecurity and trying to exert something that's really artificial. So they molding themselves to the expectations of others.
Yeah, I don't know what the actual statistics are based on the research, but in my own experience, I worked for the Department of Veterans Affairs for quite a few years, and I saw many male veterans, and in particular, a large percentage of combat veterans. And many of them, it was an honor and a privilege to work with them, and I thank them all, men and women, for their service. And many of the men that I worked with shared with me that whatever issues they were having, that I was the first person that they had told those issues to, even issues that they'd experienced from childhood, abuse, sexual assault, depression, suicide attempts, that I was the first person they'd ever shared any of that with. And I do think it goes back to what you're saying, that women are oftentimes more transparent. They're more open about their feelings. And part of that is a cultural thing, because we teach men that you have to be strong, and so strong that you're not vulnerable and you don't share any of your weaknesses. Whereas women are often taught to be vulnerable and weak, and so they're more likely to be open with their emotions. And then there's also an element of how, just some gender differences and how we're created by and large, not to overgeneralize men and women, but that there are some differences, obviously, in how we're developed and how we're created, and even as far as how we deal with our emotions. So men certainly do struggle with insecurity as well, but they usually are less likely to talk about it.
It's interesting. On this program, we have two featured guests. One is Overcoming Abuse. It's a program we do every month. 1 in every 3 women is abused, whether it's verbal, emotional, or physical, and 1 out of every 7 men will have experienced abuse, physical, emotional, or sexual abuse in the course of their lifetime. That's a global number. And then we do a special Overcoming Shame with Dr. Mark Baker, who is an expert in the root of shame, and that if we can overcome shame, we can conquer and master almost everything if we're not coming from a shame-centric approach to our problems. Expectations, and I'm going to make this point, then we're going to go to break, because I want you to really ponder this. There is a complete distinction between expectations and desires, and the difference is in our response mechanism. When someone's expectations are not met, the declaration is, I am disappointed. Therefore, the entire being is engaged in this action of disappointment. When a desire is not met, I want a new car. Well, I'm disappointed I didn't get a new car. Okay? I'm not disappointed as an entity. I'm disappointed in the unmet desire. Oh, well, maybe next year I'll get a new car, and I move on. One fully engages the person. The other one is a momentary or very targeted. So managing expectations, dealing with expectations, is critical to relationship management. We're talking with Dr. Laurel Shaler, author of the newly released book, Relational Reset, Unlearning the Habits That Hold You Back. Answering the question, is there a relationship you're often disappointed by, and what you should do about it and how you can handle it. This is a guidebook to navigate through quite a few of the most common 12 really common, impactful areas in evaluating our part in a relationship and whether or not it's healthy, unhealthy, whether it's healthy for us or unhealthy for us, or healthy or unhealthy for the person we're in relationship with, and it gives us a new lens to look at. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about expectations and how we can know if our expectations are realistic in a particular relationship. We'll be right back. Not everything that makes the headlines has biblical importance, but many events that happen around the world do, and you never hear about them. Igniting a Nation is pleased to teach Revealing Prophecy every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. at the Marriott 280 in Birmingham. We will cover worldwide events and insider information that will connect the dots of what's happening around the world with biblical prophecy. If you happen to miss a class, we'll televise each week's class at 10 o'clock Central Time on ignitinganation.com and all our social media outlets. Copies of the teachings will also be available to purchase on our website at www.ignitinganation.com. The Lord meets you right where you are, and so does Igniting a Nation's new live streaming outlets. You can now watch Revealing the Truth, Revealing the Bible, and Prophecy Revealed simulcast live each Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 1 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time on YouTube Live, Facebook Live, Vimeo, Periscope, and through our website, www.ignitinganation.com. No matter what device you are using, our program will automatically scale so you won't have to miss a single program. And if you happen to miss an episode, you can always subscribe to the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel and access over 1,000 interviews and never miss your favorite authors, special guests, and topics that interest you the most.
There are lots of ways to see Israel, but nothing compares to seeing the land of the book and the people of the book through the eyes of two Jewish believers who can take you on a journey that will bring the entire Bible to life. When you join Rabbi Eric Walker and his #1 rated tour guide, Edo Canaan, in Israel, you'll experience incredible teachings, first-class accommodations, and actually walk where Jesus walked. You will experience the Bible transforming from black and white into living color, and you will never see the Bible in the same way again. For more information, visit us at www.ignitinganation.com/events.
The Lord contends with what contends with you, and Igniting a Nation is committed to bringing to light each and every issue that faces a believer's life. Our live stream programming and teachings take you on a journey to finding biblical truth from a wide variety of experts who share their insights into a deeper walk with the Lord. We have assembled the most comprehensive panel of experts in the fields of prophecy, caregiving, healing from trauma, shame, and abuse, and so much more. We continue to expand our teachings and programming to meet your needs. We're committed to healing the nations with biblical truth. Visit www.ignitinganation.com to develop a deeper walk with the Lord and start your journey to a transformed life. The Bible commands us to study to show ourselves approved, but most study using Bible study tools and not actually studying the Bible chapter and verse. Igniting a Nation is pleased to present Revealing the Bible, recorded and taught each week before a live audience. We take you deeper into the actual Bible and verse in both Hebrew and English and connect the dots between the Old and New Testament. You can attend our 2 classes in Tuscaloosa and Birmingham, or watch the program every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Central Time on ignitinganation.com and all our other simulcast outlets. For more information, visit www.ignitinganation.com/events. Not everything that makes the... Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Dr. Laurel Shaler, author of Relational Reset, Unlearning the Habits That Hold You Back. Dr. Shaler, welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
You know, during the break, we were talking about transparency. We were talking about the fact that as you wrote this book, you know, how much of this is you, how much of it is your clientele, how much of it is just general observations. And one of the things you and I came to the conclusion that for $14.99, you can save yourself a couple $1,000s in therapy by getting this book and really navigating it, because there are some very personal, challenging questions within the book. And a lot of people deal with insecurity. A lot of people deal with unmet expectations, and unmet expectations is where I imprint that on you to perform to my standard, as opposed to seeking out God to be the answer to my prayer. People can't be the answer to your prayer unless they're on assignment from God to fill that void. So you have to really connect whether or not this is a realistic expectation or an unrealistic expectation. How do we go about determining whether our expectations are realistic? Rhonda Stoppe wrote a book entitled If My Husband Would Just Change, I Would Be Happy, and Other Myths Wives Believe. Mm-hmm. All right? It's a myth that if this person would just change, you'd be happy. It's a myth that a person can fill all of your needs. What are kind of some of the unrealistic expectations we put on people? And in this relational reset, how do we reset that so that we can continue in relationship with somebody that we've placed and put a burden of unrealistic expectations on?
Right. We may not realize it, but we often put people on pedestals, and we really expect them to be perfect. I love the title of that book. I'll have to pick that one up, because it's true. We expect other people to change. We don't need to change. Other people need to change. And we really do expect perfection. And when people disappoint us, whether it's something small or something big, oftentimes it really breaks our entire view and our trust in the other person. And, you know, obviously there are things that are really significant that have to be addressed. You know, somebody's having an affair, they have an addiction, or they're being abusive. There are many major issues that we should never overlook. But oftentimes there's just these day-to-day things that really can get in the way. You know, we become angry with a spouse for the whole evening because we realized they forgot to run an errand they said they were going to run during the day. You know, why would we allow that to ruin hours of our short time with that person? But we do it because we expect them to be perfect. So one way that we can overcome this is by having realistic expectations. And another way is by remembering that we are going to disappoint other people too. We're also not perfect. So when we can have some empathy and recognize that, oh, not only can we put ourselves in the other person's shoes, but we've been in their shoes before, then oftentimes we won't be as upset with them. You asked how we can manage this. I really think the best way is to try and reframe and look for the good in the situation, or the good in the long-term outcome. You know, I have an example that I can share where when I was a teenager in high school, I didn't get something in high school that I really wanted. I really wanted to be the student body president. And I had worked for 3 years to be the student body president. I knew that I was the most qualified and the most dedicated, but I wasn't elected. And I was so disappointed in that experience. And a few months later, God brought something kind of quirky into my life, but I wouldn't have been able to do this new thing had I won the election and been able to be student body president. So I was able to take a look back over that experience and say, okay, God redeemed that disappointment. He knew what my future plans were, and so he was able to cover that, and I didn't have to, feel sad or disappointed any longer. And it's not that we're trying to manipulate the past or the future or make something up, but there are times when we can genuinely realize that God has done something new in our life, something good, something different for us, and we don't have to stay stuck in that disappointment anymore.
You know, it's kind of this paradox where on one hand I claim Romans 8:28, all things work together for good for those who love him and called according to its purpose. And then over here I have this, oh, my life's an upheaval. I didn't get what I wanted, I'm living in the moment. Well, either all things work for good or all things don't work for good. It's an all or nothing proposition, and therefore just because I can't see the good doesn't mean that it's not a part of this building a wall. You know, when you're building a wall, you do it brick by brick. Right? This is one brick in that wall, but without that brick there's going to be a hole. And could that be the hole that causes the whole wall to crumble down? So as God's building the framework of our life, He wants it to be good foundation stones. And when we have disappointment in circumstances, I've often said to people, I said, you have no idea what God has spared you from. You got this diagnosis. You went in for a simple procedure and you were complaining, I've got to have minor surgery. And while they were doing the minor surgery, they discovered that you had a tumor. And they discovered that you had a tumor, and they took the tumor out. And because they caught it so early that it didn't even appear when they were checking your MRI for what they were operating on, that they were able to get it. You didn't need chemotherapy, you didn't need radiation, you were complaining about having to go through this procedure, missing 3 days of work, and look what God spared you from. And why don't we take that same attitude that God is sovereign? We claim that God is sovereign, but we don't live like God is sovereign. And so everything becomes a disappointment, and then we look for somebody to blame, and we scan the radar, and then we hone in on, well, the closest person to his husband, wife, best friend, pastor, counselor. You did this to me. You. You know, either God's sovereign over all things, or He's sovereign over no things.
Right.
And it really does come into our understanding of the Word of God and what God's plan is. So is it safe to say that dealing with disappointment is an inevitable part of life?
It's an inevitable part of life, and in every single relationship, we are going to struggle with some disappointments happening. And how we handle the disappointment really dictates whether our relationships can flourish and grow stronger, or whether they start to fall apart. So we have to be mindful of how we're going to handle those disappointments. And it doesn't mean that we just become doormats and people can walk all over us and we never speak up for ourselves and we just let them do whatever they want to do. And it doesn't mean that we never have a right to be disappointed. Sometimes disappointments will happen. But again, what do we do with the disappointment, and how do we interact with the person who disappointed us?
You know, if you went to the doctor and the doctor told you you're allergic to peanuts, you'd stop eating peanuts. If the doctor told you that you were allergic to pollen and you needed to take this medication every morning and squirt something in your nose every morning, every spring and every fall, you would do it. But
Sure.
if you come along into a relationship and say there's going to be disappointment, and you don't squirt your nose, you don't take your pill, you don't do the things that the diagnosis is already there, what can I do to minimize the impact of the disappointment? What can I do to manage the disappointment? And is the disappointment something that's been building and I need to withdraw from that situation? If you had a bad reaction to the medicine, would you keep taking it if you were broken out in hives and you were confined to bed, but you didn't have a runny nose, but you have all these debilitating symptoms? Well, your nose isn't running. Well, praise the Lord. This is what we do in relationships. Well, you know, he stopped beating me. It's only every 6 months. So that becomes more tolerable than the way it used to be when it was every week. We do a lot of justification without addressing and being obedient to what God's calling us to do. Not every relationship is actually healthy.
No, it's not. And what I'd love to spend a few minutes talking about is the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. And before we do that, just because you mentioned this aspect of domestic violence, and if there's someone that's watching or listening and is a victim of domestic violence, I just want to give the hotline number. It's 1-800-799-7233. That's 1-800-799-7233. we absolutely should encourage those that are experiencing abuse to get help. And so that's the domestic violence hotline. But when we look at the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation, there's lots of references, as you know, Rabbi, about forgiveness throughout Scripture. But my favorite interaction, I think, is between Peter and Jesus in Matthew 18, when Peter asked Jesus, "How many times do I forgive my brother who sins against me?" And Jesus said, not 7 times, but 7 times, 70 times. And my pastor puts it this way. He says, stop counting and keep forgiving. And I think that that's the point of this message, that we must continue to forgive as the Father has forgiven us. We must forgive. But there are times when reconciliation isn't possible, or maybe it's not healthy in that moment. That doesn't mean that it's never possible, but sometimes in that moment we can't be around someone. We can't put ourselves or our children, our loved ones in a situation where they're going to be abused physically, emotionally, sexually. So absolutely, relationship forgiveness does not mean that you have to be reconciled to the person. And there are times when you realize this just isn't a healthy relationship, a good relationship. And again, you can forgive, but that doesn't mean that you have to stay in that type of relationship long term.
It's interesting that I tend to ask in premarital counseling. I marry a lot of young couples, and they come to me. I don't have a congregation anymore. We do this television ministry, and I have a teaching ministry. I'm out 4 nights a week teaching in various locations, all recorded and broadcast on our program as part of an interactive teaching program and e-courses that we do online based on the teachings. I ask them, when they face a situation, to sit back and ask themselves the question, will this matter in a month? Will this matter in 6 months? Will this matter in a year? And if your answer to any one of those is no, then what difference does it make whether or not they toast it too long, or they don't toast it long enough, or they forgot to get the cream cheese, or whatever it is that becomes the issue du jour? Is it really going to matter in the long term? So we often are faced with the decision, would we rather be right or would we rather be happy? And our insistence on driving our agenda and forcing another to comply to it becomes a control, an insecurity. It's an outcropping of insecurity. Is I want to control things, because if I can have them in my control, I find security in me being the captain of the ship. And this is a warning. It's a flare. It's a huge flare when you sit in a counseling session and somebody talks about how this person controls every move I make. Mm-hmm. That's not natural. That's denying your ability to, it's actually diminishing your capabilities. It's rather insulting in many cases, that says that you're not worthy, you're not good enough to handle this matter on your own, you're not smart enough, and therefore if you don't do it my way, you're doing it the wrong way. And I'm sure you've seen this in your practice. How do you address that? That's marital, that's friends, planning events, doing things together, baby showers, wedding showers, weddings, funerals, life events seem to be where the big blow-ups occur. The holiday meal, the funeral arrangements, the dealing with somebody terminal, adoption. I'm an adoptive parent. I've been through the process. I know the things you have to do to have a child naturally are nothing. The things you have to do to have a child through adoption is $30,000 and an investigation by the FBI, by the local sheriff's department, by the state police, courses, hours and hours of courses to assess your ability to have a child. Your home is investigated, your neighbors are interviewed, and all this to bring a child into your home, because you can't do it on your own. You have to go through a system that is punitive, to say the least. But everybody has an opinion about that whole process.
Well, speaking of which, when we were going through our adoption process at one of our home studies, one of the inspectors that came wanted us to knock down a load-bearing wall because they thought that they found some lead in it. It used to be an external wall, and now it's an internal wall. And then they came and did another test and realized no, and then we just needed to paint it. But yes, the things that are expected of you, certainly there is a huge element of control, and we want to make sure that the children being placed are safe. But there's a huge element of control in the adoption process. I would say that if it's premarital counseling, run. Seriously, if somebody is really controlling of you, they may not be the person that you should commit to spending the rest of your life with. So premarital counseling is so important. That is the time to really get to know each other on a deeper level, and having an expert that can guide you through premarital counseling is so important, and realizing that there may be some things that are going to be barriers to you really having a successful marriage, and of course making sure that you're prayerful about whether or not you should even get married, and allow the Lord to guide and direct you. But in a lot of situations, there are relationships that we can't really help, or we don't. In other words, they're relationships that we currently have. They're not necessarily future relationships, but they're ones we're in now. So yes, you could quit your job if you had a really tough time with a coworker. You could move if you had a really tough time with a neighbor. But those are extreme actions, right? We want to try and work things out with the people in our life that, to the best of our abilities, we should strive to live at peace with other people. So how can we do that? And I think the way that we communicate is so important. So there's 4 different types of communication styles. There's being aggressive, which is saying that I'm important and my thoughts and feelings and beliefs are important, but yours aren't. So I'm going to run all over you, and I'm going to stand up to you. And maybe that involves yelling and screaming and swearing and just being in your face. The opposite end of that is being passive. And passive is saying that the other person is really important, but that I'm not important. And so that's when we just take it. We just accept whatever anybody else wants to do. We don't stand up for ourselves. We don't speak up at the PTA meeting. We don't speak up at the church conference. We don't speak up in the boardroom at the office. We just accept whatever anybody else hands out to us. The third form of communication, which is really probably the worst, is passive aggressive. And this is a kind of a sneaky way of being aggressive. So a boyfriend and a girlfriend get in a text fight, and by the end of the conversation, the girlfriend says, "No worries, by the way, I'll drop your necklace off at your house tomorrow." And the boyfriend is left going, "Wait, what? Did you just break up with me? What's going on?" So it's her passive way of being aggressive. She's saying that there is no problem, but her action of wanting to return the necklace indicates there is a problem. So the best style of communication is to be assertive. And when we can be assertive, we're saying we both matter in this relationship, whether it's work or church or family or friends, we both matter. And my opinion of how we should do this matters, and your opinion of how we should do this matters. So let's talk about this. Let's each have a turn. Let's be respectful of how we communicate. Let's use the I statements. Let's practice empathy. And all of those things go into play with being assertive. And that's the best style of communication. And I believe that's the best way to deal with somebody who is controlling. Keeping in mind that just because we prefer a changed behavior doesn't mean that we're going to get it. But at least we can feel better knowing that we've been assertive.
So it goes back to the fundamental statement in the prayer that we should be offering is, Lord, let there be change, but let it begin with me. And we move this from the you to the me, and what is my role in evaluating this relationship? Is it healthy? Is it not healthy? Doesn't matter whether or not you think it's healthy or not healthy. It's how I'm perceiving it. What am I struggling with? I walk away from a lunch with you and I don't feel good, or I feel that there's been a statement made. You talk about one that a wedding planning and you're too heavy. I passed a billboard the other day and it says, does this billboard make my ad look fat? It just struck me as very funny because there's catchphrases we now use that are kind of funny, but they're grounded. Every bit of humor is grounded in a little bit of hurt. Every joke, there's a little bit of truth to that. Just like in every lie, there's a little bit of truth in that we have to be investigators to find out what the truth foundation of that statement is. But it's our role, not their role, it's our role in relationship reset. If we don't think the relationship is healthy and we go through your evaluation of what a healthy relationship should look like and it falls short, then we need to do some work, or there is the ultimate solution, and that is ending the relationship. So there are times when it is necessary to let go of a relationship.
Yes, there are. And, I've written about this before and shared with some couples in marriage counseling. I don't ever believe that it's my place to tell a married couple, you guys should get divorced. That's between them and the Lord. My goal is always to help strengthen a marriage. But of course, as we've already mentioned, if somebody's being abused, to get them to a place of safety. And I've certainly helped individuals who are being abused get to safety, and would do it again in a heartbeat, because that's so important. Yet there are times that a relationship, you've forgiven one another, but it's just not a safe relationship. It's not a healthy relationship. And it can really be a sign of maturity when we realize, like, this isn't what I need to be involved in. I have this scripture here before me, 1 Corinthians 5:11, and it just reminds us that we shouldn't associate with people who call themselves, fellow believers, but who are sexually immoral, idolaters, slanderers, drunkards, swindlers. So there is a biblical justification for not staying in a relationship just because you've become friends with a person. So say you have a friend and you had a strong relationship, and then they start going out frequently, or they're frequently intoxicated when you go out for dinner, and you just realize this is not a good relationship for me to be a part of. And you can pray for the person, and you can point them to getting some help, and try and support them in that journey if you're so led. But that doesn't mean that you have to stay in this friendship just because at one point you were friends.
Well, I think it's an important assessment tool. We joked before that for $14.99 you can get at least a minimum of 10 hours of therapy. That's a $1,500 savings. It's almost like a coupon that says that I can read this and at least I can navigate. And one of the things that will come out of this is either you'll apply these techniques, or you'll realize you might need to address some things from your past. And we strongly encourage you to take advantage of counseling. We strongly encourage both men and women to go seek someone out. I've done it in my lifetime. Jason, my executive producer, has done it in his lifetime. Dr. Laurel Shaler has done it in her lifetime. This is not something that comes from a point of weakness. This comes from a point of strength, where I recognize that I'm ill-equipped to handle a particular situation, and it's having an impact on me. And as I work at my general relationships, are they generally healthy? Are they happy? Are they prosperous? Are they both mutually beneficial? And if they're not, do they need a relational reset? Meaning, I don't have to cut off the relationship, but I do need to change the dynamic, but I just don't know how. And this is a script for you to follow, to look and examine yourself and what part you're playing in the healthy or the unhealthy aspects of this relationship, and whether or not you're coming from a place of strength or a place of woundedness. I highly recommend Relational Reset, unlearning the habits that hold you back. And we do have habits. We tend to repeat the same behavior that didn't work in the last relationship, in this new relationship, hoping that that person would be more receptive to my style. And we thank you, Dr. Laurel Shaler, for your insights. We thank you for sharing this great tool and resource with us, and we ask the Lord to bless all the works of your hands.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
God bless. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.